So let us start with the interview. Short introduction so that the listeners will understand who's talking. So I'm Nighty from the Guild Wars 2 community, and yes, I'm here with
Durzan from the guildnews.de website, and we got here from ArenaNet.
Hello, I'm Jessica. I'm the competitive test lead at ArenaNet.
And I'm Devon Carver. I'm the competitive team design lead.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. First, we are cooperating. We built up a roundtable. Perhaps you heard about it. Yeah, okay. We are collecting feedback and give it to our community manager, in our case Ramon Donke. And we had at the last two roundtables the topic World vs. World, so the best topic for you. And we wanted to know, because there is many criticism about this roundtable, does the feedback reach you?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So when Ramon does those roundtable sessions, we absolutely get that feedback. In terms of kind of directly addressing questions, it's very much a question by question basis, right? Some of the things are things that we're absolutely comfortable talking about, are especially if it's more kind of a philosophical question, like something we get asked a lot is, what's your stance on Zerg play, or what's your stance on defending? So we try and address those when we can. They often tend to be kind of the same answer because our philosophy is fairly standard and stays the way it is for a good reason. It's also the case that a lot of times we see that feedback and either it's something that we're already in the process of addressing but we can't necessarily talk about because we're not at that point, or it starts to inform future decision making. It's really important to us across the game, but certainly in World vs. World, to look at the way people are playing the game and the way that they're talking about the way they play the game to inform the decisions that we make. So we try, it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. You don't want to make too many changes just because people ask for them. There needs to be a good reason behind it, because sometimes people are asked for a thing that they think is going to be really awesome and then it turns out to have negative consequences. So when we go through that kind of feedback, we really do that analysis of, okay, what design-wise is kind of the meat of the question? What's the thing that they're really looking for here? And what's a way that we can start to move things in that direction? Something that's very true about World vs. World is because of the nature of that game type, the fact that it's so player versus player focused and it's mostly player interaction, it's very difficult for us to know all the consequences of any change that we make. We can make obviously informed guesses. We play the game a lot. We have ideas of the way that things will shift tactically or the direction things will go. But that being said, I don't think we've ever made a change that hasn't seen additional effects that we didn't foresee. Sometimes those are really, really positive and you see a lot of really cool things. Sometimes there are drawbacks to the changes that we make. So we try and be really deliberative about the changes that we make to World vs. World so that we hopefully limit the negative consequences and really emphasize positive ones. Yeah.
So with the feature release, we got to know that there will be different colors for the commander function. And that was one of the points a player requested a lot. And so will there be another feature with it, like scaling for the visibility of the commander function, so that only the own guild members may see it, or only be visible for other commanders, kind of that?
So the main changes that are coming in this feature pack to the commander system are the multiple colors. The system is also changing to be account bound as opposed to character bound. So each tag that's purchased will now be available to all your characters. The commander system is one that there are still additional improvements that we want to make. The guild only version is one that we've talked about very seriously. We're not it's not happening right now. It's not something that will be in this feature pack. But that being said, it is something that we very, very seriously are looking at. It's one that does have other consequences, so we're trying to think through a little bit if there's a way that we can do it that's maybe even better than simply just flipping it to guild only. But that being said, we know kind of that's something that there's been a lot of requests for, and the reasoning behind those requests is reasons that we're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's something that we should really investigate. But it's not going to come in this feature pack. I certainly don't have anything to say about if it's coming for sure or not, but it is, like I said, something we're very interested in and we've been investigating actively.
Let's talk about the basic design of World vs. World. I think, and other players, World vs. World is just a capture and hold system. In the past we got the Orb of Power, and that was like a little bit capture the flag, and it is array, and now we got the runes, and it's another capture and hold system. Are there any plans to change this feeling a little bit?
So not really, not at the moment anyways, nothing that we're at a position to be talking about. What we do try and do with World vs. World is kind of what I said earlier, which is make smaller changes that end up having larger scale effects. In terms of the basic level gameplay, I think we're really happy with the way that World vs. World plays. Maybe not 100% of the things that happen in World vs. World, but the basics of the gameplay are something that we think is really solid and has shown that it has a lot of life. It's something that people have been playing at very steady numbers for a very, very long time and still enjoying. That being said, we're aware of the fact that, you know, every game has kind of its shelf life. And so World vs. World is something that is really important to us to keep up the engagement in and keep the community involved in. So we're always kind of looking for things that we can do to introduce new ways to play the game, introduce changes to the rules occasionally. The Siege Disabler trick, which is the trick that we're going to be talking about that's coming out in the feature pack, is something that we expect is going to have some pretty far-reaching effects on the way that the game gets played. Specifically, we think it's going to empower defense a lot. Basically what it is it's like a grenade that you throw. It has a range of about 1,200 units. It hits an area and it disables all the siege weapons in that area for 45 seconds. So it's something that is going to make it so a small group now is going to have a much better chance of defending an objective, holding it for at least long enough for reinforcements to show up, possibly even holding off a larger force if they really know what they're doing. It's the kind of change that we want to introduce and then see what happens before we make additional changes, so that we see how the gameplay shifts. We think it's going to empower defense a lot. It probably will, but it could end up empowering attack as well. So it's something that we want to see what the after effects are, and then continue to make adjustments to the game type to get it to where we feel like World vs. World is really capturing all of that feel that we want. I mean, really the important thing about World vs. World is kind of that epic group action, feeling like you're accomplishing a goal as a unit, whether it be a 5-man party that's roaming around, whether it be a 25-man group that's capturing keeps, or whether it be your world as a whole winning matchups. And so we try and look for ways to kind of go through each of those levels and say, all right, what are we doing? How is this change helping a 5-man group? How is this change helping, a 25-man group? How is this change helping the whole course of the game? So like I said, I don't know that I wouldn't expect to see major changes in the way that World vs. World plays in that sense, but definitely there will be continued tactical advancements and things that we put in that we expect will empower strategy and tactical gameplay.
You talked about the grenade, and it will disable arrow cards, golem siege, and what about traps? Like a supply trap or something.
It doesn't disable traps. So it only affects siege weapons, so it disables siege weapons. It won't disable traps. The thing that you would still need to do with traps is either do a thing that I know a lot of groups do, which is send one person out ahead to kind of run through and set off traps, or kind of deal with the consequences. But yeah, I mean they're still there and will continue to function the same way.
What about cannons and mortars?
It does, yeah. Okay, it hits those too. Yeah, so it's all siege weapons. It's very much, like I said, it's going to help attackers as well, but my expectation is going to be most useful for defensive groups. I mean, obviously, it's a projectile, so it functions like a grenade, so it's going to be harder to hit siege weapons that are, say, inside walls. Whereas if you're up on a wall, it's going to be fairly simple to hit somebody that's down on the ground. So the goal, like I said, is it's something that we think is going to have pretty big effects, and we really want to see what happens before we make any further changes.
So these are effects balancing when you are attacker or defender. How about balances in the system of rewarding? So there are a lot of rewards when you take another keep or something, but there are no rewards for example, Scout, who is always there, is an important role, but does not get any reward for the work he's doing.
So that is something that this is kind of a thing that I'll say a lot, but that's something that we're like very acutely aware of. And actually, I mean, just a week or two ago, we started up a very serious discussion about how we can start thinking about tackling that question in a much more broad sense. And I've said this before on the forums, but kind of the baseline reason that some of those activities are not rewarding right now is just technically it's very difficult for us to have an accurate sense of who's doing what. So I mean, without getting really too far down into the details of like the way the actual engine works and the game works, it's just hard for us to know, say, the Doliaks are pretty much the best example. It's basically impossible for us to know with the way that they're built right now how many people are around and what they're actually doing, which is why when the game launched, you used to get rewards at the end of a Doliak path. But what would end up happening is literally all you had to do was be standing near the Doliak when it got to a door, and then you got rewards. So obviously that system that doesn't really encourage anything except standing at the end of Doliak paths, which is like the least useful thing that we could encourage. So we made that change. So defense and scouting are the thing that really becomes hard is they're kind of nebulous activities. So defense is a little more well-defined. You know, defending an objective is being there, fighting off attackers, hopefully stopping them from taking it. Scouting, it's very difficult for us to have a real solid sense of what that means and what a way to track that, right? Like to reward it appropriately, we really need a way for the game to say, okay, you've done one thing worth of scouting, you get X rewards. So it's a system that we're kind of always thinking about and trying to figure out a way to really empower that. I actually think that not necessarily on the reward side per se, but the Siege Disabler is going to give scouts another tool that they can use at the very least. So it may not be something that, you're going to get event rewards or you're going to get gold or karma, but it does give you something else to do. So you'll now be in a position where you can run through and you can start really harrying an opposing team by being like, oh, you think you guys are going to use that trebuchet? I don't think so. And you can toss those and then head off and do some other things. Like real long-term changes to that are something that we're really looking at and trying to figure out. It's just kind of a tough question to answer. So we want to find the systemic way to answer that so that we have a good sense of who's contributing, how they're contributing, and then we can reward them appropriately. It really is, the barrier is the technical side, which is knowing exactly who's participating, because we really do want to be able to give people rewards for doing those things because we realize how important they are. I mean, it is common practice for a lot of large guilds to have people that they task and say, hey, your job is to sit in this keep all night. And then at the end of the night, everyone who's been doing other things contributes gold and pays them off as kind of a non-game system reward. Ideally, we'd find a way to solve that on our end as well, so that that's not something that players necessarily have to do. Certainly they still can, and it's impressive that that's kind of a system that players have worked out amongst themselves. But ideally for us, it's a system that we would be able to handle on our end, that the game would be providing those rewards for those activities that are vital to world versus world success. So, long answer. It's a technical problem. It's one that we're continuing to try and find good answers for. I think every time we come back to the problem, we get closer and closer to getting an answer that will, if not necessarily 100% solve it, will certainly make it a lot better than it is now. And it's definitely something that we want to do and hope to see as soon as we can.
So there's another point with balancing. It concerns the points in a bracket, so the weekly points made by the different fractions. So is there any discussion intern where you think about the amount of players on the different servers and available in different times? So we have the prime time in Europe, the early evening, when a lot of players want to join the map, and we have some times at night where there are 80 from the one and 5 or 10 from the other fraction.
So yes is the answer to that question. We don't have anything to announce at this point about ways to address that. It's definitely something we think about. It's a problem that it's another one that's kind of difficult to solve. It's somewhat inherent to the way that World versus World works. We've got some ideas on ways to at least start addressing it, and hopefully we'll be in a position to talk more about those sometime in the future. I don't know when exactly, but it's definitely something we're aware of, and it's something that we're trying to figure out. Coverage is a big issue. It's a big issue in each region. It's something you see that the top worlds in North America tend to have guilds from North America, guilds from Europe, guilds from China, and guilds from Australia, so that they have people on all 24 hours a day. But there are only so many players, so it means that subsection of players is really limited on the number of worlds that they can be on. It's something we look into. There are a lot of ideas that we've tossed around, none of which have been particularly satisfying, which is why you haven't really seen a change at this point. We have some really interesting ideas, ones that I hope we'll get to try out sooner rather than later, but nothing specific to talk about yet.
So another kind what players often mention is the design of the maps. So there's a different design for the Edge of the Mist, and might it be possible to have different designs for the different borderlands, to have the player not always seen the same? Or might there be a possibility to add some water, so that there might be some more underwater battle, because a lot of players are missing that big lake in the middle of the map.
And the Quaggins. The sad Quaggins. So map changes are large-scale work. I mentioned it somewhere, I don't remember if it was an interview or it was on the forums, but the Edge of the Mist map took 9 months from start to finish. So it's not a quick process. I know that kind of from the point that we start talking about a thing to when it comes out is a very short window. In terms of how long the process actually takes. That being said, the uniformity of the Borderlands is something that we're very much aware of, and something that we're hoping to be able to address. At this point, I feel like what we would rather do than take a couple of months to make changes to the existing map is take the time to really sit down, think about what makes World versus World exciting, and what things we've learned over the last 2 years, and really work out, okay, well, what would a new map look like? What would a new map, how would the layout function? What are the things that we would want to see in a new map? What are the ways that a new map that we would want to encourage gameplay? What are the things that we would want to discourage? What are the things that we learned from Edge of the Mist that are really valuable? So one of the things that we've talked about on the forums, and we've talked about in a bunch of places, is that Edge of the Mist has a lot of choke points. It has the bridges. We like choke points, but we like them to be very strategic. So I think Edge of the Mist goes pretty far in one direction, which is just there are a lot of choke points. The version of choke points that we think is really interesting is one where, rather than they're just bridges, something like there's a valley, and that valley narrows down to a point, and if you hold that point, you as a smaller group might be able to hold back a larger group, but it's not something that stays everywhere on the map. So it's things like that. It's much more likely that what you will end up seeing is a whole new map than large-scale changes to the existing maps. That being said, I'm not promising that we're making a new map or anything like that, but the amount of work that it takes to make big changes to an existing map is not very far removed from making a whole new map. So from our perspective, we would rather kind of start from the beginning and think through what are the changes that we want to make? How do we want to make World versus World even better? It's definitely something that we're looking into. how we can do that. There's also a technical side, again, to the way that the Borderlands work, because it's actually one map, but there are 3 different files with 3 different copies of all the things. So that's another thing that we actually want to fix on the technical side, which is actually another strangely difficult problem, but something that we've been working on, which will... So once we kind of make that technical change, we're in a better position to make more changes to the Borderlands maps and how that system works.
We got season 1, we got spring tournament. When we will see summer tournament?
I can't actually answer that question, but if you stay tuned to the website for the feature pack announcements, you will not be disappointed.
So there will be...
I totally did not answer that question, but if you stay tuned to the website, the tournaments are something that we've continued to make changes to. So obviously you saw the changes from season 1 to the spring tournament. We really like what the tournaments bring. There are some downsides to them, but I think overall they've been very successful. They bring a lot of energy to World versus World. They give people a defined goal. So it's a system that we like a lot, and we want to continue to make improvements to. 2 minutes.
So another important point is that after the mega server system update, we got a problem to address the players of our home worlds to play with us in World versus World. So if there's not enough coverage on the map, we ask people in the capitals to join the map. Now it's not possible anymore because we have players from different servers. Is there any solution in progress to fix that?
So there's not a solution to announce at this point. The mega server system is one we continue to try and make adjustments to. There have been, it's a system that we think has been really, really good overall, but at the same time it's had some drawbacks. And so what we've been trying to do is kind of prioritize a list of those things and figure out how we can start knocking them out one by one. Some of them are more complicated. Ones like this one actually tends to be one of the more complicated answers because you're kind of serving 2 masters. You want to create that sense of full maps, lots of players in the PvE environment, but at the same time we still want there to be a way for World versus World players to feel like they can go into Lion's Arch, they can rally the troops and get people to show up. So we don't have an answer to that right now, but it is something we're definitely continuing to look at, and the mega server system is not in any way set in stone. It is something that will continue to evolve and ideally get better and better and solve as many of those problems as we can.
So to give you 2 points of direct feedback to that point is players are wishing for server chat, so that you can chat only with server-bind players, or even a system like you can see how many players are on which map at the time. Yes, I think the time is up, so we need to come to an end. One last question.
I just want to say thank you for the interview. I'm sorry for you, Jessica, because we didn't ask something.
In case I needed
Okay. And I hope to see you in the next days, perhaps this evening. Oh, nice. And have a nice day.